39 years ago, a young Canadian couple boarded a ferry from Victoria to Washington State for what was supposed to be a simple errand, picking up heater parts for Jay's father. They never came home. What began as an ordinary overnight trip soon turned into one of the most haunting cold cases in North American history, leaving behind two devastated families and a killer who would walk free for more than 3 decades. Their bodies were eventually discovered nearly 60 miles apart, each with a completely different manner of death. Investigators had biological evidence almost from the very beginning, evidence that clearly belonged to the killer, but in 1987 there was no way to identify whose DNA it was. The investigation dragged on year after year, producing more than 200 dead-end leads. Serial killers were investigated and ruled out. Suspects came and went. And one detective devoted nearly his entire career to a case he refused to abandon. Then, decades later, a complete stranger changed everything without even realizing it. A woman who had never heard the names Jay Cook or Tanya Van Cuylenborg uploaded her DNA to the internet simply to learn more about her family history. What happened next would permanently change criminal investigations forever. A genetic genealogist identified the killer's name in just 2 hours by tracing connections through nearly 1 million DNA profiles using a method that had never before been used to solve a murder case. The arrest shocked the entire community. Before we go deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy documentaries like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Tanya Van Cuylenborg was 18 years old and had recently graduated from high school in Saanich, British Columbia, a quiet town on Vancouver Island. She was at that beautiful stage of life where everything still feels open and possible, fresh out of school, thinking about the future, and experiencing first love. Her father, William Van Cuylenborg, later said he thought Tanya and Jay were a perfect match. He trusted Jay completely. That kind of trust only comes when parents genuinely believe their child is safe with someone. Tanya brought along her Minolta X700 camera for the trip. She wanted photographs of their first adventure together, small memories she could look back on later. Her boyfriend, Jay Cook, was 20 years old and also lived in Saanich. The couple had been dating for around 6 months. Jay was the only son in the Cook family, and his mother, Leona Cook, believed Tanya was incredibly special to him. The trip itself started for the most ordinary reason imaginable. Jay's father needed heater parts from Jinso Heating in Seattle, and Jay volunteered to drive down and pick them up. For the young couple, though, it became more than just an errand. It was their first real trip together. They planned to spend the night in the Cook family van and return home the following day with the parts and Tanya's photographs from the journey. On the evening of November 18, 1987, Jay and Tanya boarded the ferry from Sydney, British Columbia, to Port Angeles, Washington. After arriving, they transferred to another ferry from Bremerton to Seattle at 10:16 p.m. The ferry finally docked in Seattle around 11:30 that night. From that moment forward, no one knew where they went. There were no phone calls home. The next morning, when Jinso Heating opened for business, nobody arrived to collect the order. That immediately alarmed the families because this behavior was completely unlike them. Jay and Tanya were responsible young people who stayed in contact with family and did not simply disappear without explanation. By the evening of November 19th, the families knew something was seriously wrong. Jay and Tanya should have returned home hours earlier, but the phones remained silent. Both families reported them missing immediately. The search began, but there was a terrible complication. Jay and Tanya were no longer in Canada. They were somewhere in Washington State, far from home, in a place where their families had no connections and no idea where to even begin looking. The Cook and Van Cuylenborg families waited in Saanich, hoping for answers, unaware that the truth would soon become every parent's nightmare. On November 24, 1987, 6 days after the ferry crossed into Washington, a passerby driving near Alger in Skagit County saw something horrifying along a rural roadside ditch. Tanya Van Cuylenborg's body had been discarded beneath a steep embankment. She was partially undressed, naked from the waist down. She had been raped. She had been shot in the back of the head. Her hands were tied behind her back with plastic zip ties. She was only 18 years old. She had graduated high school just months earlier. She was carrying a camera to document her first trip with the boy she loved. And for 6 days, She had lain there alone before someone found her. That same day, investigators found Tanya's wallet and keys discarded near the Greyhound bus station in Bellingham, Washington, several miles north of where her body was discovered. Not far away, police located the Cook family van parked in downtown Bellingham. Inside the van, investigators found several disturbing pieces of evidence. There were zip ties matching the kind used to bind Tanya. There were plastic gloves. There were receipts, including the Bremerton to Seattle ferry ticket confirming the couple's movements on November 18th. And among all those items was something investigators could not yet understand the future importance of: Tanya's black pants. The same pants she had been wearing on the night she was murdered. Decades later, they would become the single most important piece of evidence in the case. But one item was missing. Tanya's Minolta X700 camera had vanished. The camera she brought to capture memories of their trip disappeared along with the killer and was never recovered. And Jay Cook was still missing. His family still held on to a small piece of hope that maybe he was alive somewhere. 2 days later, on November 26th, that hope ended. Jay Cook's body was discovered beneath the High Bridge in Snohomish County, nearly 60 miles south of where Tanya's body had been found. The location was near the Monroe Honor Farm Correctional Facility. Unlike Tanya, Jay had not been shot. The killer used an entirely different method. Jay had been beaten with a rock and strangled using twine and 2 red dog collars. In one especially disturbing detail, a pack of cigarettes had been forced into his throat. Zip ties matching those connected to Tanya's murder were also found near his body. 2 victims, 2 locations nearly 60 miles apart, 2 completely different methods of killing, yet unmistakably the same offender, the same calculated cruelty. Investigators now faced a case spanning 4 different Washington counties: King County, where Jay and Tanya likely disappeared after arriving in Seattle; Skagit County, where Tanya was found; Whatcom County, where the van was located; and Snohomish County, where Jay's body was discovered. The killer had moved methodically across the region, scattering bodies and evidence in a way that created chaos between jurisdictions. Still, he had left behind 2 critical clues: an unidentified fingerprint found on the van and semen recovered from Tanya's black pants. In 1987, DNA testing was still in its infancy. The first criminal case solved with DNA evidence had occurred only a year earlier. Investigators were able to develop a DNA profile from the semen evidence, labeling the unknown suspect Individual A. The DNA did not match Jay Cook. It did not match anyone in criminal databases available at the time. Investigators now possessed the clearest evidence imaginable: the killer's own biological signature, but they had no way to identify who it belonged to if that person had never been arrested before. When Tanya's body was first discovered, suspicion naturally fell on Jay Cook because he was the last known person with her and his body had not yet been found. Police had to consider every possibility. But when Jay was found murdered as well, bound with the same type of zip ties, investigators knew both young people were victims of the same killer. Over the years, detectives chased every possible lead. In 2003, Washington State Patrol investigators uploaded Individual A's DNA profile into CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database containing profiles from millions of offenders across the United States. No match was found. The killer simply wasn't in the system. More than 200 names eventually crossed Detective Jim Scharf's desk. Scharf would become the investigator most associated with this case after spending decades trying to solve it. Among the strongest suspects considered were Robert Yates and Charles Sinclair, serial killers active around Seattle during the late 1980s. Both men were thoroughly investigated. Both were ruled out through DNA testing. Every dead and only deepened the mystery surrounding Individual A. Then another bizarre twist emerged. About a month after the murders, the Cook and Van Cuylenborg families began receiving anonymous letters from someone claiming to be the killer. The letters were disturbing and threatening, mailed from various locations over the years. Investigators spent enormous amounts of time trying to determine whether the writer was truly the murderer or simply someone obsessed with the case. Finally, in 2010, after a tip from viewers of the television program Washington's Most Wanted, police identified the author. A Canadian man in his 70s suffering from severe mental illness who had become fixated on the murders after hearing about them in 1987. He had absolutely no connection to the killings. For more than 2 decades, investigators had been pulled toward a completely meaningless distraction. By the early 2000s, the murders of Jay Cook and Tanya Van Cuylenborg had become one of Washington state's most notorious cold cases. The killer had left behind DNA, but without a database match, it remained useless. If individual A had never committed another crime leading to arrest, he could potentially live out his entire life unidentified. Meanwhile, the victims' families continued waiting for answers that never came. In 1995, Detective Jim Scharf helped establish a cold case unit in Snohomish County, and this investigation became one of the team's first priorities. Scharf later described it as probably the worst unsolved case they had. For Scharf, this case became deeply personal. He wasn't related to the victims. He had no obligation beyond his job, but he could not let it go. For over 2 decades, he continued re-examining evidence, revisiting witnesses, and monitoring every advance in forensic science. He believed one thing with absolute certainty: DNA does not lie. The technology simply had not caught up yet. And eventually, it did. In 2017, 30 years after the murders, Scharf decided to try a completely new direction. He contacted Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based forensic company specializing in DNA phenotyping, technology capable of predicting a suspect's appearance from genetic material. Using individual A's DNA profile, Parabon created a computer-generated image estimating the suspect's facial structure, hair color, eye color, and skin tone. For the first time in decades, investigators were no longer staring only at a string of genetic code. They had an estimated face. More importantly, Parabon introduced Scharf to a woman named Cece Moore, one of the world's leading genetic genealogists. At the same time, completely unrelated to the investigation, a woman named Chelsea Rustad in Tumwater, Washington, did something millions of people were doing during those years. She purchased a consumer DNA kit, submitted a saliva sample, and uploaded her results to GeneMatch, a public genealogy website used to build family trees and locate distant relatives. Rustad had never heard of Jay Cook or Tanya Van Cuylenborg. She knew nothing about individual A. She was simply curious about her ancestry. But her decision would unknowingly help solve a double murder. In 2018, Scharf asked Cece Moore to attempt genetic genealogy analysis using the suspect's DNA. Moore uploaded individual A's profile into GeneMatch and began searching through roughly 1 million user profiles. None of those people knew their DNA might indirectly identify a killer. Moore located 2 distant relatives connected genetically to individual A. From there, she started building family trees backward through generations, identifying shared ancestors, and tracing descendant lines forward again. One by one, she eliminated people based on age, sex, and location until only one possible individual remained. The entire process took around 2 hours. After 31 years of failed investigations, Cece Moore narrowed the suspect pool from 1 million DNA profiles down to a single name: William Earl Talbot II. Investigators learned that Talbot had been 24 years old in 1987 and lived only about 11 kilometers from where Jay Cook's body was discovered. As Detective Scharf investigated further, the pieces began fitting together rapidly. Talbot had worked as a delivery driver around Seattle during that period and knew the region well, including the area near Jinso Heating where Jay and Tanya had intended to travel. He had also recently lost his job before the murders, leaving him without a fixed schedule. A former roommate added even more disturbing details. He remembered Talbot owning a blue blanket similar to the one found covering Jay's body. He also described Talbot as volatile and dangerous when drinking. According to the roommate, Talbot had once violently broken his sister's arm during an outburst. Most importantly, the roommate recalled Talbot previously taking him to the same general area where Jay's body was eventually discovered. But genetic genealogy alone was not enough for an arrest. Investigators still needed direct DNA from Talbot himself, so they began surveillance. Detectives followed Talbot for days while waiting for him to discard something containing his DNA. Then the breakthrough finally came. At a traffic light, a coffee cup fell from Talbot's truck. Investigators immediately collected it and rushed it to the Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory. Forensic scientist Lisa Collins compared the DNA recovered from the cup to individual A's profile. When she saw the results, she reportedly cried. It was a perfect match. The odds of another unrelated person sharing the same DNA profile were estimated at 1 in 180 quadrillion. Individual A finally had a real identity, William Earl Talbot II. Investigators reconstructed Talbot's life in 1987 piece by piece. He lived close to the dump site. He knew the roads and surrounding areas. He had no stable work schedule at the time. The evidence and timeline aligned with frightening precision. An arrest warrant was signed. On May 18, 2018, exactly 31 years after Jay Cook and Tanya Van Cuylenborg vanished, authorities announced the arrest of William Earl Talbot II. He was now 55 years old, living an ordinary life as a truck driver. For decades, nobody around him suspected he might be connected to one of the region's most infamous cold cases. At the press conference announcing the arrest, emotions overflowed. Jay's sister described the mixture of relief, joy, and sadness. Jay's mother, Leona Cook, said that while the family was finally moving toward closure, nothing could bring back her only son. The trial began in Everett, Washington, in June 2019. But this case was about more than murder. It also became a landmark test of genetic genealogy itself. Talbot's defense attacked the investigative method directly, questioning whether public genealogy databases should be used to identify criminal suspects through distant relatives. The case raised major privacy concerns. Still, the court allowed the evidence. A historic legal precedent was established. Talbot's defense argued that he and Tanya had consensual sex and claimed another unknown person committed the murders afterward. Prosecutors dismantled the argument point by point. Tanya was traveling with her boyfriend on her first major trip, and evidence showed both victims were restrained with identical zip ties and murdered as part of the same crime. After hearing all the evidence, the jury deliberated. On June 28, 2019, they returned with a verdict. William Earl Talbot II was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. The families embraced in the courtroom. 3 decades of grief, uncertainty, and waiting collapsed into one single moment. In July 2019, Talbot received 2 life sentences without parole. But the legal battle wasn't over. In 2021, the Washington Court of Appeals overturned the conviction because of concerns involving a potentially biased juror. The DNA evidence itself remained valid, but the ruling forced the families to once again face uncertainty after believing the case was finally closed. Then, on December 25, 2022, the Washington Supreme Court reinstated the guilty verdict completely, ruling that the defense had opportunities during jury selection to remove the juror but failed to do so. Talbot's life sentences were restored permanently. After 31 years, the case was finally closed beyond appeal. But the impact of the investigation reached far beyond one murderer. The murders of Jay Cook and Tanya Van Cuylenborg became the first case ever solved through genetic genealogy, changing criminal investigations forever. Soon afterward, the same method helped identify the Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo, and dozens of other violent offenders across the United States. Detective Jim Scharf later said, "Without genetic genealogy analysis, we wouldn't be standing here today." That statement became true for countless other cases solved afterward using the same revolutionary technique. But the case also raised difficult ethical questions the world is still debating today. When Chelsea Rustad uploaded her DNA to learn about her ancestry, she unknowingly exposed genetic links connected to relatives she had never met. Where does genetic privacy begin and end? When one person shares DNA, are they also sharing part of their family's genetic identity? The answers remain complicated. For Detective Jim Scharf, though, the mission never changed. From the moment he took the case in 1995, he believed Jay and Tanya deserved justice no matter how long it took. And eventually, they got it. On the evening of November 18, 1987, Jay Cook and Tanya Van Cuylenborg stepped onto a ferry, leaving Victoria with Tanya's Minolta X700 camera hanging from her shoulder. They expected an ordinary overnight trip. Pick up heater parts, sleep in the van, return home the next morning. No one imagined it would be the final journey of their lives. The photographs Tanya hoped to take were never captured. Her camera disappeared forever. The memories she intended to preserve existed only in the minds of the people who loved them. But their story left behind something else instead. A detective who refused to quit. A stranger unknowingly providing the final clue through a family tree. And a revolutionary investigative method that permanently changed how killers are found. Jay Cook and Tanya Van Cuylenborg boarded a ferry in November 1987 and never returned. But 31 years later, in a courtroom in Everett, Washington, they were finally heard. If you watched all the way to the end, thank you for spending time with Jay and Tanya's story. Leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future documentaries.